The Kargath arrived in silence. No roaring ships, no grand declarations. Just the crack of distant sniper fire and the quiet collapse of Earth's finest marksmen. The invasion had begun not with orbital bombardments or ground troops, but with precision unseen in human warfare. Every high-ranking sniper, every Special Forces sharpshooter station across the globe, was found and eliminated within days. A bullet through the skull, a beam that left no trace but death itself. The message was clear. Earth snipers were no match. Military leaders scrambled for answers. Satellite feeds showed nothing. Drone sweeps returned empty, and soldiers sent to track these ghostly assassins vanished before they could radio back. The Kargath, an alien species rumored to have conquered entire worlds without ever engaging in open combat, had reduced Earth's greatest warriors to prey. They did not fight wars, they hunted. The broadcast began soon after. The Kargath spoke through hijacked frequencies, their voices a grating mix of insectal clicks and mechanical resonance. Their language had been decoded quickly enough. "You are outmatched," they declared. "Your world is defenseless. Your kind cannot compete with true precision." The message ended the same way each time, a slow-motion replay of a human sniper's final moments, their death meticulously recorded from an unknown vantage point. Morale plummeted. Soldiers hesitated before venturing outside fortified positions. Civilians whispered of surrender. Generals debated whether to negotiate, though none believed the Kargath capable of diplomacy. Jack Callahan watched from a dimly lit barracks, his jaw tight as yet another replay flickered across the screen. He had seen enough death in his years as a Marine scout sniper, but this was different. There was no battle, no exchange of fire, just executions. He ran a hand over the worn stock of his rifle, feeling the nicks and scratches along its length, each one earned through years of patience and precision. Jack had trained in jungles, deserts, and frozen wastelands. He had tracked men for days without rest, survived on nothing but instinct and discipline. The Kargath were good, too good, but they weren't perfect. They had a pattern. Jack studied the footage again, eyes narrowing. The Kargath never fired in the rain, never took a shot in strong winds. And despite their mastery, they always chose elevated positions, towers, cliffs, rooftops. They relied on line of sight, on perfect conditions. That was their weakness. A colonel entered the room, his uniform crisp despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "Callahan, I don't need to tell you what's happening out there." Jack nodded, still focused on the screen. "They think we're predictable, that we'll come at them the same way we always do." The colonel exhaled slowly. "So we do something different." Jack stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "I go alone." The plan was simple. Disappear into the wilderness, move unpredictably, and hunt the hunters. The Kargath had studied Earth snipers, but they had never faced someone like Jack. Someone who had spent years perfecting the art of patience, of becoming nothing more than shadow and breath. He left that night, slipping past the perimeter of a devastated city. The world beyond was silent, save for the distant howl of wind through skeletal buildings. Jack kept low, navigating through collapsed streets and ruined highways, his heartbeat steady, his mind focused. Somewhere out there, a Kargath sniper watched, waiting for another human to make a mistake. Jack didn't make mistakes. He found the first sign of them at dawn, a body sprawled in the dirt, a clean hole through the forehead. No scorch marks, no blood spatter. A kill made from incredible distance. But the ground around the corpse told a different story. The Kargath had moved here recently, their footprints lighter than a human's, but deliberate. They weren't machines. They breathed, they waited, they repositioned. Jack spent the day watching, moving only when necessary. He stayed low, covered himself in dust and grime, let the scent of the earth mask him. He watched for reflections, for unnatural shapes against the ruins. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he saw it, a glint high up on a shattered office building, barely visible. A sniper's nest. He settled into position, breathing slow. The Kargath might have superior technology, but they didn't know how to read the land like he did. They didn't understand that wind could carry a bullet just enough to miss, that the human mind, when trained, could anticipate movement without the need for advanced targeting systems. Jack exhaled. His crosshairs steadied. The Kargath sniper never saw it coming. The shot was silent, the impact instant. A dark shape slumped forward, its weapon clattering to the ground below. Jack remained still, waiting for movement, listening for any sign that others had noticed. Nothing. He moved before nightfall, erasing his presence, shifting locations. The Kargath would come looking, and when they did, they would find only the wind and dust. The hunt had begun. Jack moved like a ghost through the ruins, never lingering, never giving the enemy a second chance to track him. He had spent years perfecting the art of patience, of reading a battlefield without ever stepping into a trap. The Kargath were hunters, but they were also creatures of habit, relying on superior technology rather than instinct. Jack intended to use that against them. The body of the alien sniper still lay slumped over the ledge where Jack had left it. He had taken his shot, then vanished before any of its comrades could respond. Now, in the dim light of the setting sun, he watched from a new vantage point, studying the aftermath. It didn't take long for them to react. A shimmer in the air, barely perceptible movement, signaled the arrival of a second Kargath sniper. It moved with calculated precision, adjusting its rifle before inspecting the fallen warrior. Even from a distance, Jack could see the tension in its posture. The Kargath were not used to losing. Jack resisted the urge to fire. A single kill meant nothing if he exposed himself too soon. Instead, he waited, breathing slow, counting seconds. The Kargath scanned the area, its elongated head swiveling as its visor flickered with unreadable data. Then it made a decision. The alien sniper withdrew, melting into the shadows. Jack knew what that meant. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. He moved before they could corner him, slipping to the wreckage of an old highway, past rusted-out vehicles and skeletal remains of buildings long abandoned. The city had once been alive, filled with movement and noise. Now, only silence remained. It was a hunter's paradise, so long as he wasn't the one being hunted. A sound, faint, distant, not the wind. Jack pressed himself against the crumbling remains of collapsed overpass, scanning the terrain. He had spent enough time tracking prey to recognize a shift in atmosphere. Something was out there. Then, a flicker of light, barely visible but unmistakable. Sniper scope. He dropped just as a shot cracked through the air, shattering the concrete where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. Rolling into cover, he steadied his breathing. The Kargath were adapting. This one had anticipated his movements, predicted his new position. They were learning. Good. That made it a real fight. Jack remained still, listening. The Kargath sniper wouldn't fire blindly. It would reposition, try and get a clearer shot. He needed to disrupt its rhythm. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a small shard of broken glass. Holding it at an angle, he caught the fading sunlight and flashed it toward the sniper's assumed location. A second shot rang out instantly, striking the decoy reflection instead of flesh. Jack moved. Fast. He zigzagged through the ruins, keeping his steps erratic. Another shot whizzed past, missing by inches. The Kargath was quick, but it wasn't perfect. Sliding behind the rusted shell of an overturned truck, he steadied his rifle. He had less than 10 seconds before the alien adjusted. The Kargath were masters of the long game, but Jack knew human snipers had one thing they didn't: improvisation. He didn't aim for center mass. He aimed for the air between them, just as the Kargath moved. A calculated miss. The shot struck a shattered metal beam behind the alien, ricocheting off at an angle that no targeting system would have predicted. The Kargath barely had time to react before the deflected bullet slammed into its side, puncturing armor and sending it toppling backward. Jack was moving before the body hit the ground. He didn't need confirmation. The second kill would not go unnoticed. By nightfall, he had relocated again, deeper into the city's ruined core. He found refuge inside a half-collapsed shopping complex, an old department store stripped bare by years of decay. From here, he had a vantage point over the main streets, a place to see them come before they saw him. The Kargath would come. He had rattled them. They had started this hunt expecting an easy culling of an inferior species. Now, they were losing their own. Jack settled in, adjusting his scope, preparing for the next move. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. Jack had spent the night in silence, shifting positions twice before dawn. The city was no longer just a battlefield. It was a chessboard, and every step he took had to be calculated. The Kargath wouldn't keep sending ordinary snipers. They had lost 2 now, and for a species that prided itself on precision, failure was unacceptable. He spotted movement just after sunrise, not the clumsy, overconfident swagger of an enemy expecting easy prey. This was different, fluid, purposeful. Even from a distance, Jack could tell this one was something else. Vierock, the name had surfaced in intercepted transmissions, a legend among Kargath sharpshooters. He wasn't just their best. He was their answer to the unexpected. Where others relied on technology, Vierock studied, adapted. He was here because Jack had broken the pattern, and the Kargath didn't tolerate uncertainty. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle. This wasn't just another duel. This was an execution, and both of them knew it. For an hour, neither moved. Vierock had positioned himself across the street, somewhere within the ruins of a collapsed hotel. No direct sight lines. No exposed vantage points. Just patience and pressure. Jack exhaled slowly. It wasn't a question of who would fire first. It was a question of who would break first. A distant crash echoed through the streets. Somewhere metal crumbled, bricks tumbled into dust. A distraction? No. A test. Vierock was watching for a reaction, waiting for Jack to flinch, to shift his weight, to do anything that would give him away. Jack did nothing. Minutes stretched. The air between them felt like a drawn bowstring, seconds away from snapping. Then, subtle as a breath, Jack saw it. A shift in the rubble, the faintest distortion in the air. Not a mistake. An invitation. Vierock was taunting him. Jack resisted the urge to fire. The Kargath wanted him to take the bait, to go for the obvious shot and reveal his position. It was a good trick. He had used it himself before. He let the moment pass. The game continued. Jack reached into his pack, fingers brushing against something cold, an old smoke grenade, one of the few tools he had left. A direct confrontation wasn't an option. Vierock had the advantage in range and positioning, and Jack wasn't going to win this by playing by the alien's rules. Carefully, he pulled the pin and rolled the grenade toward the open street. A hiss filled the air as thick, gray smoke billowed outward, swallowing the space between them. He moved the second it deployed. Not forward, back. Vierock would expect aggression. A human sniper, backed into a corner, would try to reposition aggressively to find a better angle. Instead, Jack circled wide, using the smoke as a veil. He slid between crumbling pillars, past rusted-out vehicles, listening, waiting. Then there, a single breath, a shift in the dust. Vierock had moved too. Jack lowered himself into a crouch, rifle steady. The Kargath was hunting now, sweeping the battlefield with the same cold precision Jack had used against his own enemies. A shadow crossed the smoke. The outline of a figure, taller than a man, heavier, yet impossibly quiet. Jack lined up the shot, and waited. 1 second. 2. Then he fired. The bullet struck home, but not where he had intended. Vierock twisted at the last moment, the round catching him high in the shoulder instead of the skull. The alien staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, it rolled into cover, its own rifle snapping up. Jack dove sideways as a beam of burning plasma lanced through the air, scorching the stone behind him. The duel had begun in earnest. Jack hit the ground running, shifting positions before Vierock could lock onto him. The Kargath sniper was wounded, but that wouldn't slow him down. If anything, it made him more dangerous. A second shot rang out, but Jack was already gone, weaving between the wreckage. Vierock wasn't shooting to kill. It was hurting him, forcing him into a corner. Jack gritted his teeth. No way out. No clear shot. Unless he spotted an old window pane, still intact despite the destruction. A surface that could reflect just enough. Jack moved fast, positioning himself at an angle, lifting his rifle not toward Vierock, but toward the glass. He fired. The bullet deflected off the surface, changing trajectory just enough to slip past the alien's cover. It struck true. A sharp exhale. A body hitting the ground. Silence. Jack remained still, rifle steady, breath slow. Then, cautiously, he advanced. Vierock lay sprawled in the rubble, his rifle inches from his clawed fingers. His chest rose and fell in shallow, shuddering breaths. Jack kept his weapon raised, watching. The alien turned its head, mandibles clicking weakly. Then, in a voice rough with something close to admiration, it rasped, "You are not prey." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Vierock exhaled one final time, and then the city was quiet again. Jack lowered his rifle. The Kargith had lost their best, and now they knew fear. Jack remained still, rifle steady, watching as Vierock's lifeless form settled into the dust. The wind carried the last remnants of smoke through the ruins, whispering through shattered buildings like the ghosts of a war still being fought. He exhaled slowly, letting his heartbeat return to normal. It should have felt like a victory. The best of the Kargith was dead by his hand. But Jack knew wars weren't won by single battles, and the silence that followed was a relief. It was anticipation. They would come. Jack retrieved his spent casings, wiped away any trace of his position, and vanished into the ruins. He needed distance, time to assess the fallout. The Kargith had thought themselves untouchable, their snipers invincible. Now, with their legend lying in the dirt, they would be forced to react. By nightfall, the response came. Distant flashes lit the skyline as the Kargith abandoned subtlety. Precision strikes reduced entire blocks to rubble, their frustration evident. They weren't hunting anymore. They were lashing out. Jack watched from the skeletal remains of an old office tower, his rifle resting across his lap. Their movements told him everything he needed to know. Vierock's death had rattled them, broken the illusion of their supremacy. The Kargith weren't gods. They could be beaten. And the humans watching from the shadows, from hidden bunkers and battered strongholds, now knew it too. The radio crackled to life. The first transmission Jack had received in days. A voice, cautious yet firm. "Callahan, this is command. We have confirmation on the kill. You really did it." Jack kept his eyes on the streets below, where squads of Kargith warriors moved with uncharacteristic urgency. "Yeah," he said. "I did it." A long pause. Then a shift in tone, something Jack hadn't heard in weeks. "Hope. Satellite intel shows enemy forces pulling back across multiple zones. You might have just turned this war around, Marine." Jack didn't answer immediately. Victory wasn't secured. Not yet. The Kargith were retreating, yes, but retreat wasn't surrender. This was something else. A recalibration. "They're not running," Jack said finally. "They're thinking." And thinking enemies were the most dangerous kind. He pushed off the ledge and began his descent, vanishing into the city once more. His war wasn't over. Not yet, but the rules had changed. The hunters had become the hunted, and Jack Callahan was just getting started.